In the peaceful suburb of Crestwood, Missouri, lives a man who thrives in solitude. Darius Coleman, a quiet black man, cherishes his privacy, working from home in the comfort of his neat little house. He is the type of person who avoids unnecessary attention, keeping his personal life separate from the bustling world outside. His days are simple, filled with routine and a steady focus on his work. For Darius, life is best lived with minimal interaction, just him, his work, and the calm silence of his home. Unlike most of his neighbors who are eager to attend block parties and engage in neighborhood chatter, Darius is content to keep to himself. His interactions with the people around him are brief and functional, only when absolutely necessary. He's the kind of neighbor you barely notice, and that's exactly how he likes it. There's something comforting about the predictability of his days, the quiet mornings spent sipping coffee at his kitchen table, and the evenings winding down in front of the television. But in a neighborhood where gossip and curiosity run high, Darius stands out, not because of anything he does, but because of what he doesn't do. His absence at social gatherings and his indifference to the neighborhood's social scene make him an enigma, a quiet figure whose life seems almost too ordinary to be of any interest. Or so it seems. Little did Darius know, a simple decision, one that many would consider entirely mundane, would soon thrust him into the spotlight, setting off a chain of events that would shatter his peaceful existence. This is the story of how a man just trying to change his Wi-Fi password would become the target of suspicion, and how that suspicion would reveal a truth far darker than anyone could have imagined. It was an ordinary Thursday afternoon when Darius first noticed something strange. He had just wrapped up a long morning of work and, like most afternoons, he decided to take a break. A quick glance at his laptop screen revealed the frustrating truth. His internet was still lagging. It was a minor inconvenience, but one that had been persistent for the past few days. The videos on his calls were buffering, and his music wouldn't stream without interruptions. Frustrated, Darius opened up his router settings on his phone, hoping to troubleshoot the issue himself. At first, he thought it was just a glitch, maybe his provider having one of those occasional slow days. But as he scrolled through the list of devices connected to his network, his eyes stopped on one that didn't seem to belong. There, at the top of the list, was a device named Crestwood I01. The name wasn't random. It wasn't just a string of numbers or letters like some of the other devices. It looked intentional, personal. Darius's brow furrowed. He lived alone, and the only devices connected to his Wi-Fi should have been his phone, laptop, and television. He didn't share his password with anyone. So who or what was Crestwood I01? A surge of annoyance washed over him. How long had this device been on his network? And what were they doing on it? With a frustrated sigh, Darius kicked the unknown device off the network and immediately reset his password. He had no tolerance for people intruding on his private space, even if it was just a Wi-Fi connection. It was simple. He'd block whoever this was, and that would be the end of it. He stepped outside to get a stronger signal, leaning against the side of his house while he typed in the new credentials. The cool air felt refreshing against his skin, but his mind was preoccupied. Who could have been using his Wi-Fi? And for what? His thoughts were interrupted when he noticed something, or rather, someone watching him. From her kitchen window, Melanie Foster observed Darius with suspicion. She had seen him around before, of course. He was a quiet man, never really engaging with anyone in the neighborhood. He didn't attend the block parties, never took part in the casual chats that happened at the mailboxes. To her, Darius was an outsider, a man who kept to himself and stayed out of the community's business. And that, for reasons she couldn't quite explain, unsettled her. Now, here he was, standing in his driveway, fiddling with his phone. Melanie squinted, her gaze narrowing. Something about the way he was standing, staring at the screen, typing rapidly, seemed off. She couldn't put her finger on it, but she felt an uncomfortable knot tighten in her stomach. It didn't help that Darius had always seemed distant. There were no small talk moments when she bumped into him at the mailbox. No wave as he pulled his car into the driveway. He had always been the type of person who preferred to remain in the background. But today, as she watched him outside, Melanie's mind began to race. Why was he standing there, so intent on his phone? What was he doing? It was that feeling. Something just didn't sit right. Her instincts screamed that he was up to something. She didn't know what it was, but her gut told her it wasn't good. Maybe he was up to something illegal. Maybe he was hacking. Maybe it was nothing, just a harmless man messing with his phone. But what if it wasn't? Before she could stop herself, she grabbed her phone. Her fingers shook slightly as she dialed 911. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling just a little. "I need to report something suspicious. My neighbor, he's outside doing something with his phone. I don't know what it is, but it looks off. Can you send someone to check it out?" The dispatcher asked a few clarifying questions, but Melanie didn't have any solid answers. She had nothing concrete, nothing specific to say. All she had was a feeling, a deep, uneasy sense that Darius was doing something wrong. The officers were on their way, and Melanie watched them approach with growing anticipation. Meanwhile, Darius had no idea what was coming. He had just finished updating his password and was about to head back inside when he heard the unmistakable wail of sirens. At first, he barely paid attention. Maybe the police were just passing by. But as the squad car slowed to a stop right in front of his driveway, his stomach dropped. The police? What did they want with him? Two officers stepped out of the car. One was a tall, broad-shouldered man with sharp features, Detective Louis Navarro. His partner, Officer Bell Carter, had a more compact frame but an air of quiet authority. They both looked serious, their eyes scanning the neighborhood as they approached Darius. Darius felt his heart rate pick up. This wasn't a routine traffic stop, and he could feel the tension in the air. The last thing he wanted was to be questioned by the police, but there was no way around it now. He let out a slow breath and stood his ground. He wasn't going to make this worse than it needed to be. "Sir?" Detective Navarro called out, his voice steady but firm. "We got a call about some suspicious activity. Can you tell us what you're doing?" Darius frowned, confused. Suspicious activity? He was just standing in his driveway, resetting his Wi-Fi password. "I'm changing my Wi-Fi password," Darius said, his voice calm, though the confusion was clear. "There's an unknown device connected to my network." But before Navarro could respond, Melanie's voice sliced through the tension. "He's lying," she called from her porch, her arms folded as she watched the scene unfold. "He's always outside doing something. Now he's just standing there, tapping away on his phone, looking around like he's watching people." Darius couldn't believe it. He turned to face her, his anger rising. He was being accused of something he hadn't done, and by the one person who had no evidence, no reason to suspect him at all. "I was on my router settings," he said flatly, trying to stay calm. "Because someone I don't know has been using my Wi-Fi." Melanie scoffed, her eyes narrowing as she stood there, arms crossed. "Sure," she said sarcastically. "And I'm supposed to believe that?" Darius felt a wave of frustration wash over him, but he forced himself to stay composed. This wasn't the time for arguments. Navarro turned to Melanie, his patience wearing thin. "Ma'am, do you have any evidence that Mr. Coleman has done something illegal?" he asked. Melanie hesitated. She didn't have evidence. She only had her suspicion, but it was enough to make her call the cops. She shook her head, her uncertainty creeping into her voice. "I don't know," she admitted. "I just think you should check." Darius watched, his heart racing. What was going to happen now? How far would this go? Navarro exchanged a look with Officer Carter before turning back to Darius. "Sir," Navarro said, his voice a little sharper now, "would you mind if we take a quick look at your router settings? Just to clear this up." Darius clenched his jaw, fighting the urge to refuse. He shouldn't have to prove anything. But he knew how quickly things could spiral out of control, and for his own peace of mind, he unlocked his phone and handed it over to the officers. As the officers leaned in to examine the device list, Darius's stomach churned. What were they going to find? And what if it was more than just a simple Wi-Fi dispute? Melanie's hands shook as she held her phone, the screen flickering in her grasp. She had no real reason to suspect anything, but that gnawing feeling in her gut wouldn't go away. It was that uncomfortable, unsettling sensation that something just wasn't right. Darius had been acting strange, standing outside, tapping away on his phone. Why? What was he doing? Why did he look so intent, so focused? She hadn't seen him in the neighborhood as much as she'd seen the others. He didn't join the block parties, didn't make small talk, didn't even wave when passing by. There was something about him, something that made her uneasy. She couldn't put her finger on it, couldn't explain it, but something in her told her that she needed to call the cops. She dialed 911, her fingers trembling slightly as she punched in the numbers. The call connected, and she took a deep breath before speaking. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's calm voice asked. I need to report something suspicious, Melanie said, her voice shaking despite her attempt to sound composed. My neighbor, he's outside doing something with his phone, and I don't know what it is, but it looks off. The dispatcher asked for more details, but Melanie didn't have much to give. She hadn't seen any illegal activity, had no proof of anything, and yet something in her felt that Darius was up to something. She couldn't explain it. She couldn't. But the more she watched him standing there in the driveway, the more that feeling intensified. He's always outside doing something strange, Melanie continued, almost desperate for the dispatcher to understand. He never comes to the block parties, he doesn't talk to anyone. And now he's just standing there, tapping on his phone. It doesn't feel right. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. The dispatcher, too, could hear the unease in her voice. Ma'am, we'll send someone to check it out. Please stay where you are. Melanie ended the call and waited, her eyes fixed on Darius, who remained oblivious to the chain of events he had just set into motion. She had no idea how things would unfold, but she knew that the police were on their way. The sirens would soon be echoing through the quiet neighborhood, and in that moment, she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Darius, still standing outside, had no idea that his life was about to take an unexpected turn. He was focused on getting the new Wi-Fi password typed in, his thoughts preoccupied with who could have been using his internet. Why had they targeted him? What were they doing? The sound of sirens approached, faint at first but growing louder by the second. Darius paused, looking down the street, confused. He couldn't see anything immediately, no flashing lights, no commotion, but the sirens were unmistakable. He shifted on his feet, his eyes scanning the scene, his nerves starting to jangle with uncertainty. And then, just as he thought it might have been some random emergency elsewhere, he saw it, the police car slowing to a stop right in front of his house. His stomach dropped. The sirens blared louder as the squad car came to a halt, and Darius felt his heart rate spike. He didn't panic, but there was something deeply unsettling about the situation. He hadn't done anything wrong. He was just trying to fix his internet connection. Yet here they were, two officers stepping out of the car, looking directly at him. Detective Louis Navarro was tall, his broad shoulders sharp against the backdrop of the quiet neighborhood. His serious demeanor was enough to make Darius's stomach churn. His partner, Officer Belle Carter, stood slightly behind him, her eyes scanning the surroundings with a quiet authority. Both officers were focused on Darius, their eyes never leaving him as they made their way toward him. "Good afternoon," Navarro said, his voice calm but firm. "We received a call about suspicious activity. Can you tell us what you're doing?" Darius blinked, taken aback by the question. Suspicious activity? What did that even mean? He was standing in his own driveway, changing his Wi-Fi password. "I'm changing my Wi-Fi password," Darius replied, his voice steady, though a hint of confusion laced his words. "There was an unknown device connected to my network, and I'm just trying to secure it." Navarro exchanged a quick look with Officer Carter before responding. "Do you live here?" Darius raised an eyebrow. The question was absurd. Of course, he lived there. His car was in the driveway, his name was on the mailbox, and he had been living in the same house for years. It was the kind of question that, on its own, seemed innocent enough but also felt jarring. Did they not believe him? Were they looking for something else? "Yes," Darius said, his arms crossing as he tried to suppress his frustration. "I've lived here for 3 years." Before either officer could respond, Melanie's voice cut through the air, sharp and accusing. "He's lying," she shouted from her porch, her arms folded in front of her. "He's always outside doing something. I've seen him. He's been standing there for over 10 minutes, messing with his phone, looking around like he's watching people." Darius's face flushed with anger. Was she serious? He had done nothing but stand outside, minding his own business. Yet here she was, making him out to be a criminal. "I was just fixing my router settings," Darius said, trying to keep his voice calm but feeling the irritation creeping in. "Because someone's been using my Wi-Fi without permission." Melanie scoffed, her skepticism clear. "Oh, sure," she said sarcastically, crossing her arms tighter. "And I'm supposed to believe that?" Darius shot her a look that was hard to ignore, but he didn't argue. The police were here now, and he knew better than to escalate things. Navarro turned back to Melanie. His tone was polite but sharp. "Ma'am, do you have any evidence that Mr. Coleman has done something illegal?" Melanie hesitated. She didn't have evidence. She had only her suspicion. She had nothing solid, nothing real to accuse him of. But her gut told her something was wrong. Something was off about him. "I don't know," Melanie finally admitted. "I just think you should check. Something's not right." Navarro took a deep breath, clearly losing patience. He turned back to Darius. "Sir, would you mind if we take a quick look at your router settings, just to clear this up?" Darius clenched his jaw, unwilling to let his frustration show. He shouldn't have to prove anything. But he also knew how these situations could escalate, and he didn't want to risk anything spiraling out of control. He unlocked his phone, opened up the router settings, and handed it over to the officers as they leaned in. Scanning the device list, Darius held his breath. The air between them was thick with tension, and he could feel his heart pounding in his chest. What would they find? Would they believe him? Would this all blow over? Or would something much worse be lurking just beneath the surface? As Detective Navarro leaned in, his eyes scanning the list of devices connected to Darius's Wi-Fi network, the tension in the air thickened. Officer Carter, standing close behind him, studied the screen intently, her fingers tracing the names of the connected devices. Darius stood frozen, his heart hammering in his chest, his mind racing. What were they going to find? Navarro's expression shifted. His eyes narrowed, and his posture stiffened. "Wait a second," he muttered under his breath. He clicked on one of the connected devices, the one labeled Crestwood I-01. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Darius felt his stomach churn as he glanced between the officers. What had they found? Navarro's finger hovered over the screen. "This device, Crestwood I-01, has been connected to your network for quite a while, hasn't it?" he asked, his voice now more serious than before. Darius swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Yeah," he said, trying to sound calm. but a cold knot of fear formed in the pit of his stomach. I didn't notice it until today, but now that you mention it, I've seen it pop up once or twice before. Navarro turned his gaze to Carter, who was already looking at the data logs. Her face tightened, her expression darkening. She pointed at something on the screen. This device. It's been accessing something else. Something other than just your Wi-Fi. Darius's heart skipped a beat. He blinked, confusion flooding his senses. What do you mean? Navarro didn't answer immediately. He clicked through a few more tabs, then turned the laptop toward Darius. It's been accessing your home security cameras, he said slowly, his voice steady but edged with something darker now. This device has been watching you. Darius's breath caught in his throat. His knees felt weak. He reached out instinctively, his hands trembling as he gripped the table for support. My cameras? He repeated, barely able to comprehend what he was hearing. What? How is that even possible? Carter stepped closer, her face now filled with concern. Someone's been watching your live feeds, she confirmed, her voice tinged with disbelief. We're seeing activity on your home cameras, Darius. It's not just a one-time thing. This has been happening for days. Darius could barely focus on the words. His mind was spinning, his thoughts a blur of questions. His cameras, his most private moments, had been exposed. And worse, the officers were now looking at the same feeds he had used to protect his home. He felt a cold wave of panic wash over him, his mind scrambling to piece together the reality of the situation. Who would do this? Who could possibly have the means to spy on him so intimately? As if to answer his unspoken question, Navarro clicked on a few more files. This device hasn't just been accessing your cameras. It's been running non-stop, continuously watching your feeds. Darius's blood ran cold. He knew he had installed those cameras for protection, to keep his home safe. But never in a million years had he imagined that someone within his very neighborhood, would use them against him. What do you mean, watching my feeds? Darius's voice was barely a whisper, as if saying the words aloud would make the nightmare real. Navarro turned the laptop around again, his finger pointing at a new set of logs. Look here, the device has been active, watching your cameras at all hours. And it's not just your home. Darius's eyes widened. He leaned in, his breath caught in his throat. What do you mean, not just mine? Officer Carter grimaced, her fingers tapping the screen. It's been accessing other homes in the neighborhood, she said, her voice low, serious. We're seeing multiple addresses, other homes, being targeted. Darius's mind raced as the enormity of the situation started to sink in. This wasn't just about his home. This was about the entire neighborhood. Someone had infiltrated not just his security system, but the security of others around him. He could hardly wrap his mind around the implications. Navarro's voice cut through the mounting tension. This isn't just a prank anymore, Darius. Someone is using this network to spy on everyone in the area. And they've been doing it for far too long. Darius felt his legs wobble beneath him. He steadied himself, leaning against the table, trying to calm his racing heart. His thoughts were in chaos. Who could be doing this? And how had they gotten into the cameras? Was it someone from the neighborhood? Someone close to him? A chill swept through him as he thought back to all the moments he'd spent in his home, thinking he was safe. All of those moments, now vulnerable, now exposed. Officer Carter's voice snapped him back to reality. Darius, look at this. She had opened another log file. It was a list of IP addresses. Each entry indicated the devices that had connected to the camera feeds. Darius's stomach dropped as he scanned the list of unfamiliar addresses. But then, his eyes froze on one in particular. Wait, that address, Darius murmured, barely able to speak. That's not just my house. Navarro leaned in closer. What do you mean? Darius pointed at the screen. That address. It's from the house down the street. That's Melanie's house. There was a long pause. The room seemed to grow colder, the weight of Darius's words sinking in. Officer Carter's jaw tightened, and Navarro's expression shifted. The reality was settling in. and it was much worse than anyone had imagined. This can't be, Melanie whispered, her voice shaking as she stepped closer, her face pale. She had been watching from the porch, her earlier confidence evaporating into shock and disbelief. How could? Navarro turned to Melanie, his tone serious, almost grim. This isn't just about Darius anymore. You're part of this too. Your cameras, your house. Someone's been watching everything. And if they were targeting Darius, they might be targeting you too. Melanie recoiled as if struck. No, that's not possible. Darius stood still, his mind reeling. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone, but his thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Navarro speaking again, his voice grave. We need to get to the bottom of this, Navarro said. This isn't just an invasion of privacy. It's a felony. We need to figure out who's behind this, and we need to do it now. The discovery was far from over. It was just the beginning. The web of deception had only started to unravel, and what they would find next would shake the very foundation of their peaceful neighborhood. Darius sat at the dining table, his eyes glued to the laptop screen. The police officers hovered nearby, their faces serious, their expressions a mix of determination and concern. But Darius couldn't look away from the lines of data on the screen, each line a thread that seemed to pull him deeper into the mystery. He felt his pulse quicken, a mix of dread and urgency mounting inside him. The IP addresses, each one connected to his security cameras and the neighbors, seemed to be leading him somewhere close, somewhere he wasn't ready to face. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he traced the trail of data, clicking on the logs with shaky hands. His mind raced with the implications. This wasn't just about his privacy anymore. This was about the entire neighborhood. And as he dug deeper into the logs, he saw it. The last IP address, the one that had been accessing his cameras for days, was not from some random outsider. No, it can't be, Darius whispered to himself, his voice barely audible. He zoomed in on the address, his eyes narrowing. It was a local address. A house just a few doors down from his own. Brandon Foster. Darius's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the name. Couldn't be. But the data didn't lie. Brandon Foster was living just down the street, and the IP logs confirmed it. The same Brandon who had moved in with Melanie only a few months ago. The same young man she had taken in, the one who was always on his computer, barely socializing. Darius had never thought much of it. He had no reason to suspect that Brandon was anything but a quiet, reserved college student. But now, with the evidence laid out before him, it was clear. Brandon was behind the device that had infiltrated the neighborhood's security systems. Brandon had been watching everyone, using their private cameras as his window into their lives. Brandon? Darius whispered, the name feeling like a punch to his gut. His eyes flicked between the officers. It's Brandon, Melanie's nephew. He's the one who's been doing this. Navarro leaned in, his eyes scanning the screen. Brandon Foster? He repeated, his voice low, as if testing the name, trying to make sense of the revelation. Are you sure? Darius nodded, his mind racing. It's his address. It's coming from his house, just down the street. He could feel the weight of the discovery settling over him. He's been spying on everyone. He's been using my camera feeds, and now I'm seeing his name in the logs. It's him. Carter stepped forward, her face hardening. We need to act fast, she said, glancing at Navarro. We need to find him before he does any more damage. Darius stood up from the table, his mind made up. I know where he lives. I can take you there. Navarro nodded. No, you stay here, he said firmly. Let us handle this. We don't know how far this has gone, how much damage he's caused. We'll need to approach this carefully. Darius clenched his jaw. He hated the idea of staying behind, knowing that Brandon, the person who had been right under their noses, was just a few doors down. He had uncovered the truth, but now he had to wait as the police took over. Felt wrong. It felt like his life had just been turned upside down, and now he was powerless to do anything but watch. Melanie stood off to the side, her arms crossed tightly across her chest, as she watched the exchange between the officers and Darius. Her mind was reeling, her body frozen with shock. Brandon? Couldn't be. He was just a kid. Quiet. A little awkward. He had never shown any signs of this kind of behavior. But as Darius's words sunk in, the truth began to take hold. "I don't believe it," she murmured, shaking her head in disbelief. Brandon wouldn't do something like this. Darius looked over at her, his eyes hard. "You need to face it, Melanie. He's been spying on you too. On all of us." Her face turned pale as she thought back to the strange feeling she'd had all along. How Brandon had always been in his room. How he'd spent so much time on his computer. Now it made sense. Too much sense. I never thought." Melanie trailed off, her voice breaking. She looked at Darius, the weight of her mistake heavy on her shoulders. "I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to think that it could be him." "I know," Darius replied quietly, his voice soft but firm. "But this is real. He's been watching all of us." The officers were already preparing to leave. Navarro turned to Darius once more. "We're going to take care of this, don't worry. You did the right thing by helping us find the source." But Darius couldn't help the feeling of unease gnawing at him. His hands trembled as he watched the police car pull away. What if Brandon wasn't alone? What if there were others involved? What if the damage was even worse than they realized? The house that Darius had once passed by countless times, just a few doors down, now felt like a house of horrors. Navarro and Carter approached cautiously, their hands resting near their weapons as they surveyed the front porch, the windows, the street around them. The peaceful neighborhood they all called home now seemed like a trap, a place of secrets hidden in plain sight. They knocked on the door. "Brandon Foster?" Navarro called out, his voice steady but firm. "We need to speak with you. Open up." Inside, the sound of movement was faint at first, then louder, the shuffle of feet across the floor. A chair scraping across the floor. Brandon was there, he was hiding something. Navarro's grip tightened on the doorframe as he motioned for Carter to be ready. The door creaked open, revealing Brandon. He looked startled, his eyes wide, his body tense. His face showed no emotion, but his hands fidgeted at his sides, as if trying to conceal something. "What's going on?" Brandon asked, his voice tight. "We need to talk to you about the security cameras in the neighborhood," Carter said, her eyes narrowing as she stepped forward. "We have reason to believe you've been accessing them without permission. You want to explain that?" Brandon's face didn't change, but his fingers clenched. His jaw tightened. He tried to maintain his composure, but the lie was already unraveling. His shoulders slumped, and he took a slow breath, as if trying to summon the courage to speak. "Look, I didn't mean for it to get this far," he began, his voice faster now, desperate. "It started as a joke, just seeing if I could get into someone's Wi-Fi. I never meant to hurt anyone." The weight of his confession hung in the air, each word more damning than the last. Navarro's face hardened. "How many people have you watched?" he demanded. Brandon hesitated. Then he looked at the floor, the guilt written clearly on his face. "I don't know. More than a few. I didn't think it would go this far." As the truth began to unravel, the tension in the air was almost unbearable. The neighborhood they once knew was no longer a place of safety and comfort. It was a battleground, one where secrets and lies had been lurking in the shadows. And now those secrets were coming to light. The door to Brandon's house creaked open, revealing the young man standing on the threshold, his face pale and drawn. The officers were quiet, their presence commanding yet calm. Officer Carter's eyes scanned the space behind him, taking in every detail. As Detective Navarro stepped forward, his tone low and deliberate. "Brandon Foster," Navarro began, his voice firm. "We need to talk to you about some security cameras in the neighborhood. We have reason to believe you've been accessing them without permission. Do you want to explain that?" Brandon's expression remained unreadable, though his eyes flickered for just a moment, betraying a flicker of unease. His mouth tightened into a line, and his hands shifted nervously at his sides. He took a deep breath, his voice shaking slightly as he spoke. "I don't know what you're talking about," Brandon said, his words coming out quickly, as if to avoid being caught. "I've never done anything like that." Carter took a step closer, her gaze never leaving him. "We've traced the activity to your house, Brandon. The IP address is coming from your network. It's been watching the cameras around the neighborhood, people's private lives, without their knowledge. How long has this been going on?" Brandon's face twitched, but he didn't answer immediately. His eyes darted to the floor, his fingers curling into tight fists. He wasn't fooling anyone, but he kept his head down, struggling to find the right words. His silence spoke volumes. "Look, we don't need to make this harder than it is," Navarro said, his voice calm but with an edge that made the air around them feel heavy. "You know we can take this further, right? You've invaded the privacy of multiple families. Brandon, you're in deep now." Brandon shifted uncomfortably. His breath came out in shallow bursts. The weight of the truth was suffocating him. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. For a moment, it seemed like he might deny everything again. But the guilt in his eyes was palpable. Finally, the truth broke free, like a dam cracking under pressure. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," Brandon confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was just supposed to be a joke. Just hacking into someone's Wi-Fi, seeing if I could get access. But then—" His words faltered, as if he couldn't quite bring himself to say what he had done next. Carter stepped closer, her voice hardening. "Then what, Brandon? What did you do?" He hesitated, his lips trembling as he forced the words out. I started watching the cameras. I didn't think it was a big deal at first. Just checking in. I was curious. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, I swear." A cold silence settled over the room. The officers exchanged a look, but their faces remained unreadable. Brandon's admission hung in the air like a heavy fog, thick and suffocating. Navarro's gaze never left him. "You hacked into their systems," he said flatly, his tone more somber now. "You didn't just steal their Wi-Fi, you violated their privacy. You spied on their lives. People trusted their cameras to keep them safe, Brandon. And you used them for what? Curiosity, entertainment." Brandon's eyes filled with shame. His shoulders slumped, as though the weight of his actions was finally crashing down on him. I didn't think it was a big deal. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. His voice faltered, breaking. "I just wanted to see what I could find. I never thought about the consequences. I never thought about how it would feel to have someone watching me, watching my family." Carter stepped back, her expression unreadable. "You had no idea the damage you were causing, did you?" she asked, her voice colder than before. "You invaded people's most private moments, Brandon. You watched them when they thought they were safe." Brandon closed his eyes, unable to look them in the face. I know, he whispered, barely able to speak through the shame. "I'm sorry. I don't know what I was thinking." The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. Darius's face flashed in Brandon's mind. Darius, the one who had uncovered his secret. He hadn't been able to look Darius in the eye since the discovery. The guilt gnawed at him, tearing him apart. And Melanie, his aunt, had trusted him. She had taken him in, helped him through school. And now, this was how he had repaid her. "I don't know what's wrong with me," Brandon murmured, his voice cracking. "I didn't want anyone to get hurt. It was just a stupid thing to do. But I kept doing it, couldn't stop. Felt like, I don't know, felt like I had all this power. Like I could see everything. It's twisted. I know." Navarro's face remained calm, but there was a cold edge to his voice when he spoke again. "What else, Brandon? How many people did you spy on? How many lives did you invade?" Brandon hesitated. His fingers twitched. I don't know. I didn't keep count. But I saw people in their homes. I watched them get ready in the morning. I watched them talk to their kids. I watched them. Just live. I watched so many people and I thought it was harmless at first. But I should have stopped. I should have known it was wrong. I know it now. The room was still. The only sound the soft rustle of papers on the table. The weight of Brandon's confession sank in. And in that moment, the gravity of his actions seemed to hit everyone in the room at once. "You've hurt a lot of people, Brandon," Navarro said quietly, his voice filled with both disappointment and sympathy. "But you have a chance to make this right. Right now, it's about taking responsibility for what you've done." Brandon's shoulders trembled as he looked up at the officers, his face wet with tears. "I'm so sorry," he whispered again, his voice breaking. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I swear. Please, I never meant for it to get this bad." Navarro and Carter exchanged a glance, and Carter nodded. "We'll take it from here," she said, her voice softening as the officers began to move toward the door. Brandon remained standing there, rooted to the spot. His chest heaved with silent sobs, each breath a reminder of the devastation he had caused. He couldn't undo what he had done, couldn't erase the invasion of privacy, the hurt he had caused. All he could do now was face the consequences and try somehow to live with the guilt of it all. Melanie had trusted him, and now the truth was out, as painful and ugly as it was. "Brandon, you're under arrest," Navarro said, his voice steady, "for unauthorized access of computer systems and unlawful surveillance." Brandon nodded, too distraught to say anything else as the officers moved toward him. The weight of his confession still heavy in the air, and outside, Darius stood at the window, his heart heavy with a mixture of relief and anger. The neighborhood had been violated, its privacy stolen, and the one responsible was someone they all had trusted. The consequences of curiosity and the illusion of power had become all too clear as Brandon was led out of the house in handcuffs. His face pale and stricken with guilt, the gravity of the situation seemed to settle in like a heavy fog. His once quiet, seemingly ordinary life had come crashing down in the most unexpected way. He had invaded the privacy of his neighbors, shattered their trust, and, in doing so, had destroyed his own future. As the officers escorted him to the patrol car, Darius watched from the window, his emotions a tangled web of relief, anger, and disbelief. Relief, because the truth had finally come to light. The constant, gnawing suspicion that had plagued him for days, the feeling that something was wrong, had been validated. The person responsible for this invasion of privacy, the person who had been spying on him and others in the neighborhood, was finally going to face the consequences. But with that relief came anger, too. Anger at how easily suspicion had been cast on him, how quickly he had become the target of a neighbor's fear and prejudice. Melanie, standing silently in the front yard, was the one who felt the weight of the situation the most. Her shoulders were slumped, her face pale, her eyes filled with disbelief. She had always prided herself on being a compassionate, understanding person, someone who opened her home to those in need. But now, standing there, watching her nephew being taken away in cuffs, she couldn't help but feel the crushing realization that she had made a mistake. She had been so sure, so certain that Darius was the one who had done something wrong. It had been easy to project her suspicions onto him. After all, he kept to himself, didn't socialize with the neighbors, didn't engage in the typical suburban life. And now, looking at the aftermath of her assumptions, the shame washed over her like a wave. She slowly turned to Darius, who was standing in the doorway, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He didn't say anything at first, just watched her as if waiting for her to speak. But the weight of her actions, the false accusations, the rush to judgment, hung heavily in the air. I'm so sorry, Melanie said, her voice breaking. I should have never called the police on you. I let my bias take over and I ruined everything. Darius simply looked at her, his face calm and composed. He had every right to be angry, to lash out, to demand an apology. But he didn't. Instead, he spoke the words that would forever stick with her. I was just changing my Wi-Fi password, he said softly, his voice steady, almost detached. And I got the cops called on me. That's it. Melanie's eyes welled up with tears as she looked at him. The truth hit her like a ton of bricks. She had let her assumptions cloud her judgment. She had jumped to conclusions without knowing the facts. And in doing so, she had hurt someone who had done nothing wrong. She had allowed her own biases to take over, and it had nearly ruined a person's life. I was wrong, Melanie whispered, her voice shaking. I was so wrong. Darius's gaze softened, just a little. I know, he said quietly, but the lesson is in the mistake. You can't let your assumptions guide your actions. People deserve better than that. There was no anger in his voice, only the quiet wisdom of someone who had endured more than his fair share of unjust treatment. He didn't need an apology. He didn't even want one. What mattered to him was that the lesson had been learned, that people would think twice before jumping to conclusions in the future. You have to do better, Darius said, his voice calm but firm. We all do. If we're going to live together in a community, we need to trust each other. We need to stop letting our fears and assumptions cloud the truth. Melanie stood there, tears streaming down her face, as the weight of Darius's words settled deep into her heart. She had seen the damage that had been done, the harm caused by her own misguided actions. But in that moment, she knew that the lesson she had learned was far more valuable than anything she could have hoped for. The rest of the neighborhood was slowly waking up to the news, the shock still reverberating through every corner of the street. People gathered on their porches, in their front yards, their eyes wide with disbelief. It wasn't just Brandon's arrest that stunned them. It was the revelation of how easily someone had been able to invade their privacy, how little they had known about the dangers lurking right under their noses. But even as the initial shock wore off, the community began to come together. They started to talk, not just about what had happened, but about how they could move forward, how they could rebuild the trust that had been broken, how they could support each other in a way that made them stronger, more united, and more aware of the impact their actions could have on others. And through it all, Darius remained silent, content to let the lesson speak for itself. He didn't need to say anything more. The truth had been laid bare, and everyone in that neighborhood had learned something valuable, something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. This story isn't just about one man being wrongfully accused. It's about the dangers of bias, the power of assumptions, and the importance of trust in our communities. We all have our own fears, our own prejudices, but it's how we choose to act on them that defines us, as we've seen in this story. Jumping to conclusions without knowing the full truth can have devastating consequences. But when we take a step back, when we take the time to listen and understand, we can avoid making those mistakes. We can create a community based on trust, respect, and empathy. So, if you've learned something from this story, if you've found value in the lesson of assumptions and the importance of doing better, please consider subscribing to the channel. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and let's continue learning and growing together. Remember, we all make mistakes. What matters is how we learn from them and how we treat others along the way. Let's do better together.